Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. At what point are people going to realize just how truly bad it was? We gotta call it exactly what it is, folks. The Democrat Party was attempting to run a full-blown authoritarian censorship regime. And I'm not talking in theory, not in some fantasy future dystopia world. No, but in reality, in America. That is exactly what they were attempting to usher in under Joe Biden's administration. They attempted to weaponize the term disinformation and then use every tool of the federal government to crush dissent, to silence opposition, and to label anything inconvenient to their agenda as dangerous disinformation that had to be stifled. That's not hyperbole, folks. That is actually what happened. And now the truth is finally spilling out on top of what we already know from the Twitter files and everything else. This is Joe Biden's true legacy. On top of his economic and foreign policy failures, it's not something that we should forget or something that should be shoved under the rug. In my view, it's something that needs to be brought back to the forefront, and possibly that's exactly what's happening here with the Trump administration. Let me show you guys what just happened at the White House with Marco Rubio and give you a little bit of context behind the viral clip. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so let's first start off with this Marco Rubio clip. Take a look at this.
Something else we got out of the business of wasn't widely reported, or maybe it was. We had an office in the Department of State whose job it was to censor Americans. And by the way, I'm not going to say who it is, I'll leave it up to them. There's at least one person at this table today who had a dossier in that building of social media posts to identify them as purveyors of disinformation. We have these dossiers. We are going to be turning those over to these individuals. Well, we are going to turn over these dossiers to the individuals, and they'll decide whether they want to disclose it or not. But just think about it. The Department of State of the United States had set up an office to monitor the social media posts and commentary of American citizens to identify them as vectors of disinformation. When we know that the best way to combat disinformation is freedom of speech and transparency. And so that's what we're going to be in the business of doing. We're not going to have an office that does that.
Alright folks, so Marco Rubio basically just said, he straight up said, that somebody in the Biden cabinet room had a dossier on them at the State Department where they were following social media posts to identify them as purveyors of disinformation. JD Vance then jokes and says, was it me or Elon Musk? But just think for a second how absolutely wild that is. These people had files on American citizens associated with their political opponent, and they were using the State Department to monitor them for, I guess, tweeting things that the regime didn't like. It's absolutely insane. It's not surprising considering it follows in line with everything else that they were doing, but it just goes to show how far this went. This was a big part of the Biden regime's attempt to weaponize federal agencies against conservatives. And we've already covered and seen a lot of evidence that basically proves that's the type of behavior and the types of programs that the Biden regime was focusing on and attempting to usher into American politics. And speaking of documented evidence, we've got more. Here's an official government document that's been released, adding to the paper trail. I'll post it here on screen and you could pause and read it for yourself, but essentially, the US government under Joe Biden launched a full-scale digital literacy campaign with the explicit goal of combating online disinformation and DT recruitment. DT stands for domestic terrorism. All the typical buzzwords, right? Digital literacy. In other words, policing speech online to achieve their preferred outcome. Combating online disinformation, in other words, combating information that's inconvenient to them, and then labeling the people who engaged in this supposed disinformation as potential domestic terrorist threats. It falls right in line with what Joe Biden was saying when he labeled Trump supporters as, quote, the greatest threat to the homeland. And surprise, surprise, in Democrat fashion, how exactly did they plan on doing this? By funding shady NGOs, partnering with the DHS, the State Department, and using USAID dollars and the Department of Education to, quote, facilitate development of evidence-based digital literacy programming. In other words, they wanted to control the narrative, control information online, and the word says it all, programming. They wanted to program the people to think a certain way. That's the translation, a coordinated censorship framework designed to silence opposition and brainwash the public. And you might be thinking, well, maybe you're taking a step too far here. Maybe that's just your interpretation, but come on. Let's not forget that they actually tried to roll this stuff out formally with Biden's Ministry of Truth, aka the Disinformation Governance Board. Remember that absolute disaster with Nina Jankovics, the cringe TikTok queen who was employed to police your opinions? Yeah, she was supposed to be America's disinformation czar. Then, of course, they had to back off after all the public outrage. Not to mention Nina Jankovics, the supposed disinformation czar who was going to tackle online misinformation, had literally pushed deep state propaganda, suggesting the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. But anyways, the truth is that Nina Jankowicz was the public face of a program that was being built behind the scenes. And for a while there, I remember during the 2020 to 2022 era, disinformation was all the rage on the left, right? Democrats saw the concept of disinformation as a perfect tool to weaponize. I remember vividly when Barack Obama was going on a tour giving all kinds of speeches about the dangers of disinformation. During the 2020 election and during the midterms, he kept lecturing us about the dangers of conservative misinformation.
The whole misinformation, social media infrastructure, the conservative media infrastructure, we've had this conversation before. That is a problem that is going to outlast Trump. Trump is a symptom of it and an accelerant to it. It has gotten turbocharged because of social media and because the head of our government, our federal government, has resorted to it. But when you look at insane conspiracy theories like QAnon seeping into the mainstream of the Republican Party, what that tells you is that there are no more guardrails within that media ecosystem. One of the biggest challenges all of us have, this is really a genuine American society issue, is how do we reestablish some baselines of truth that at least the vast majority of people can agree to. What we have seen over the last couple of years is a White House enabled by Republicans in Congress and a media structure that supports them that has not just differed in terms of policy, but has gone at the very foundations of who we are and who we should be, that suggests facts don't matter, science doesn't matter, that suggests that a deadly disease is fake news, that sees the Justice Department as simply an extension and an arm of the personal concerns of the president, that actively promotes division.
How rich that is, coming from the Democrat Party, the greatest purveyors of disinformation, a political establishment that deals almost explicitly in lies and hoaxes. And there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation, of course, is when you unintentionally get something wrong or spread a lie or bad information, and disinformation is spreading false information that is deliberately created and spread to mislead or deceive. And that is exactly what the Democrats do. That is their entire political shtick at this point. But they were out here warning about the dangers of the conservative mis- and disinformation sphere. Absolutely ridiculous. And for a while it was catching on. And then, of course, everything changed the moment Elon Musk bought Twitter. Remember that? Formerly Twitter, now X. The day everything changed, the day they lost control, when the Twitter files pulled the curtain back on this whole thing, showing the backdoor channels, the government requests, the censorship by proxy schemes. And now we're learning that State Department operatives were keeping tabs on senators, business leaders, targeting political opposition with dossiers, basically Soviet playbook stuff. This is full-blown unconstitutional behavior. These people ran an information war against its own citizens, essentially trying to use the power of the state to control what you see, what you think, and to label people who say things that they disagree with as domestic terrorist threats, just like when Merrick Garland identified concerned parents at school boards as domestic terrorists. And don't try to tell me that it was just a pilot program. It wasn't meant to censor people, it was meant to educate. Give me a break. We saw it all happening in real time. It was all heading one direction. It was clearly a calculated effort to influence elections, to bury inconvenient truths, and to silence opposition. The entire Biden censorship regime, the whole apparatus, must be audited from start to finish, exposed to the people, and frankly, legislation should probably be passed to ensure that it never happens again. What the Democrats were toying with was some seriously dangerous stuff, and it's the most un-American thing I could think of. To attack the First Amendment, the first and most important right of every American citizen, it's just unconscionable. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.